What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? We are back in the studio with a guest, obviously in the run-up to the November election here, where we're trying to have as many people running for office as possible who will waste their time talking to us. So today we have a person I will have the benefit to get to vote for in the November election. And Eric Olson, you want to give us your elevator pitch? Tell us what you're running for, why you're doing it.
I'm Eric Olson, running for State House in District 11B. So that's East Central Minnesota between Rush City and Willow River, basically, and then west to Mora. So if you're in that area, you will also get a chance to vote for me.
That's awesome.
I'm from Pine City originally, so this is an area I've retired to put myself in the generational space for you. I'm very much an advocate for local causes, and I think we have gotten to the point of too much autocracy in government, and we need to put a bit more funding and a bit more power back into the hands of local businesses, local communities, local governments. And I think that can do a lot of good things for us. We'll get a chance to talk about some of those as we go. But
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got some of that on there. You're currently running against Nathan Nelson, correct?
Yes, Nathan Nelson's the incumbent.
And it's the most Midwestern Minnesotan race in history. Eric Olson versus Nathan Nelson. It's a Ole and Sven punchline right around the corner there. I've had the opportunity to get to know you a little bit personally because I've been showing up to drink with some of the DFL people every once in a while. So
I haven't received an invite.
Well, you can come for a district that you're not.
You've got one coming from me.
Yeah. But tell us, this isn't your first time running. You ran before.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit how that went.
Well, not as well as I hoped, obviously, since I'm not in office now. This is a district which it's hard to run on party line here for somebody who's a DFL, that's Democratic side, endorsed candidate.
Right.
I have to convince a lot of people. I knock on a lot of doors. And so first run at things was a lot about building enough name recognition that people knew who I was. I still outpolled the statewide and the national candidates in the last election.
Sure.
And I hope this time I can persuade a few more people. I knock on about 4,000 people's doors in the district in the last one, and I'm on pace to do that again.
That is awesome. Putting in the legwork, quite literally.
Yes.
Right.
And I just want to say, I did actually invite Nathan Nelson to be on here today. He did respond and said he was tied up, had something else going on, but said he would be open to rescheduling. I don't know if that'll pan out, but if it does, I'd be happy to have him on as well. So that was an option, and we did talk about that before, and you said you were more than willing to be here and have a face-to-face kind of talk about the issues. So I always think that's important.
The studio might be a little cramped.
we can make it. Two people.
Squeeze in.
Two people. But anyway, so what you think? You mentioned this a little bit. I had a question here about why you think that you got back in the saddle and why you think you'll be more successful this time. And obviously, name recognition was a big part of that. Is there more you got going for you think this time than the last time?
I've learned things as well. Talking to people, probably the most important part of talking to people is listening to what they have to say. That's what the job of representative is,
Absolutely.
after all. So I've gotten to hear from a lot of what people think as they talk to me, and people are very gracious at the doors. It's one thing that we think the world is very, very polarized, and sometimes it feels that way. But when you're talking to people face to face, you're surprised at how much we have in common and how much we're willing to share if we get to the actual issues instead of a discussion.
Right.
I'm also pushing on issues, trying to schedule formalized debates in this next cycle, and I think that will help me to get the word out on what I really stand for. It's a little more than a D versus an R next to my name on the ballot, and that's probably the most important part. As I mentioned in this district, it's not a party line win, but it is a persuadable district.
Well, and the more local you get, I think the easier it is to do that. So
agreed.
I think I think we should just kind of get into your big topics then, and then we'll go through to more of the nitty gritty stuff. So the things that I've heard you kind of talk about the most is local funding, rural areas. This is always a struggle.
Yes.
And then education, healthcare, climate change. Those are kind of your big four. You wanna run through sort of what you plan on how you're running on those, but how do you plan to enact change with those when you get
Sure.
into office?
The good news is, I'll start with the first one of those, which is local action. I think one of the reasons we get rather polarized is we've put a lot of money and a lot of things back up into the state and the federal levels. And it's hard for somebody to make a one-size-fits-all decision that applies to everybody. Our government is better served to make decisions locally. Sometimes we fail, sometimes we succeed, but we learn from each other one way or the other. And that is a really positive thing and helps us to be more positive. Specifically in that, the thing that I most advocate for is we've got a couple of programs called local government aid and county program aid. Those are how income taxes, basically, how your taxes that you pay to the state get back to cities and counties for the county program aid if you don't live in a city. Those have been cut very steadily for the last 30 years until they're much, much smaller than they used to be.
Sure.
And that means there's less money for funding of street infrastructure, for housing projects, for things that cities need to be doing. And the same thing in counties outside of the cities.
Counties, townships,
Yeah, I don't mean to give short shrift to them, but it's a little hard to duplicate. I advocate for putting that money back to where it was, that share of money. The idea is already there. There's a formula for distribution. If we just push that back up, that means more money to Pine City. And that means we spend more money on infrastructure. It connects people to their government better. And when people are more connected, they're less angry. And then we actually get things done instead of fighting about them. So I think this is an area where we could get bipartisan agreement. I don't think this would be a party line, Democrat versus Republican vote. I think we'd be able to get some agreement between rural and urban, particularly. And I think that would help to heal divide. This is one of the most important things I advocate for, and I think it's very doable. I don't think it's a challenge for us to get in place. If I get elected, something I really will advocate for.
Well, I agree with that. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, quick. I guess just sort of following up on that. So obviously, there's different levels of government, and you've discussed that. And there's a differentiator between federal spending and then the state, and just the interaction of powers involved with that. Where do you see the biggest deficiency between local and state funding, or just policy making? That obviously there's the taxes element where the funding is reduced over time, but is there a particular element that people or yourself are critical of the state governing and how it's limiting to local ability to do things?
Sure. The most obvious one is really infrastructure.
Sure.
If you look at the state of water infrastructure, for example,
Yeah.
most small towns, and in fact, a lot of the large cities, you are finding a lot of people going around trying to fix emergency projects that have been deferred because there isn't a steady state of funding in them. And that's particularly bad for lower property tax areas that can't levy for it.
Yeah, of course.
And this is probably the prime example of that kind of funding. So
Sure.
when your street has a pothole, this is mostly because we haven't adequately funded the cities.
Sure. Okay. Fair enough.
I forgot what I was going to say, so you can go. Keep.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, one of the next big topics you have is education.
Yes.
What do you see as a current issue with, obviously with our current education out here?
Okay. I've got two issues that I advocate for specifically. I was a teacher, so I've got actual classroom experience.
In Pine City.
Yes, in Pine City, for that matter. There's two things at the government level that we can really be doing.
Okay.
Number one is related to the previous discussion.
Sure.
There's a separate amount of funding that goes to fund essentially capital maintenance, the ongoing maintenance of schools. That is in addition to per pupil funding we get a certain amount per student, but there's a property tax adjustment. Like the local government aid and the county program aid, that's been cut back very steadily. I thought there was a really interesting study from the Rush City superintendent who calculated the amount you had to levy on property taxes over the last 25 years, and it was within $10 of the amount that's been cut out of that fund.
I mean, so you're not going to find something much more direct as evidence than that.
Yes.
And obviously, that's a good thing to run on. And when it comes to local funding in general, rural communities getting funded for anything is always a problem.
Yes.
Because we just have less population density to pull that in. And a lot of times people feel like we pay more in taxes and we get less for it than, places that are more densely populated. So I think that is an excellent thing to run on. And obviously education in rural areas is a bit under-resourced as well, almost always. So
there's one more point I'd like to make about
Yeah, absolutely.
that, which is a side effect of the same thing. Small schools, the number of students fluctuates up and down very seriously from year to year. And when you base everything on a per pupil funding, that means your funding goes up and down. That means young teachers have a hard time staying in one place.
Right.
And that breaks student-teacher relationships. That breaks community-teacher relationships that
Sure.
are really important. And I think the same kind of steadier funding would help rural schools in particular. Large schools, it all averages out, just law of statistics when you've got
Sure.
a very large population.
I'm sure it makes it more difficult for talent acquisition for just finding teachers in general and
absolutely.
good teachers, certainly.
And it makes it more difficult to retain the good ones
Yeah.
that you do find because you run up against hard economics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's an important point out of the same thing that we could do. So.
No, and I'm sure it also makes it more difficult to commit to taking on bigger projects for the school, like additions and adding technology and that sort of thing. Because if you don't know that you're going to be able to make the payments on that through following years as class sizes or pupil sizes fluctuate, then that's going to be a problem. All right, healthcare. This is another huge one for rural areas, especially because we have less access to healthcare here. You've got to drive further to a clinic or a doctor. Emergency rooms are fewer and further between, and then a lot more people tend to be self-employed in rural areas, which means we have a lot less access to healthcare. This is something near and dear to my heart because I've gone a lot of years just rolling the dice and hoping I was healthy enough to make it through. So what's your specifics on that?
Okay, it's very clear that the more payers you have into a single system, the more efficient things get. I traveled for work for a long time, so I understand what a national health system can do for a lot of things in terms of efficiency and in terms of what it can deliver. I think that's hard to get to here. This is an area that's really challenging because where we are. It's clear we're failing. We can go on about that. There's plenty of statistics. We get less good health outcomes and we pay more.
Right. Yeah, that's really the only one, honestly. That's all you need to know is we pay more and we get worse outcomes.
There's no other stat needed at that point.
Yes. So what can we do about it is the next question, because I always try to work in terms of solutions. The starting point is to increase the centralization. We do have, through the Affordable Care Act, through Obamacare as it's sometimes called, we do have a set of exchanges. It's where I get my insurance specifically. Sure. And we need to open up public option plans in that space to encourage the people who are in need of a plan that's larger to gather that mass together of the many people who, like you, are rolling the dice and don't really want to. That's something we can do fairly quickly. That doesn't take away anyone's insurance. That's a starting point that I think we could get some agreement on.
So that would be basically like expanding a program like MNsure to be more widely available?
MNsure is right now does private health insurance sold through an exchange. It encourages transparency, so that's good. It makes the
But MNsure also helps people who are under a certain income bracket get reduced or altogether free insurance.
Minnesota Care, as an option within the MNsure space, does that.
Okay.
Correct. So that is the first option that's there for very low income people to be people who really, really need it badly. Okay, now that leaves a big donut hole between people like me who can afford to pay for a private plan, but want it to be transparent and still want it to be efficient for people. But and people who can't afford anything. There's a big gap of people who could probably afford it, but it means not paying the bills quite as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, of course.
And that's the people that we need the public option for.
Yeah.
I don't see it directly as an expansion of Minnesota Care itself,
Okay.
so though that's one option. I think this should be, if possible, a subsidized plan
Yep.
to meet the needs of that particular group of people, because they're different from the very low income set of people, and we need to be able to encourage a multiple set of plans that do different levels of insurance that's serving the market in this case. So I think that's the starting point. Is
Absolutely.
to
And so do you see that as the state would be creating a new public option?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
All right.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think that obviously we're for public health care.
Yeah, I
and-
mean,
and
ideally.
publicly owned, basically any infrastructure that's human necessity. So
yes, the market's broken with health insurance because you can't say no when you're sick.
Yeah.
yeah, no, of
Yeah.
course.
And you don't have time to shop around. They always say,
Yes.
it gives you options like, I'm dying. I don't have time to compare prices between doctors.
And the options suck. We know he knows that firsthand. That it's not a
No,
there's not great options out there.
There really isn't.
And so, yeah, that fundamentally that public option, and I think the market would win because there's enough people there that we would see that succeed, and it would prove itself, and it would grow in efficiency.
No, I don't know that I would agree with that. You think the private market would win?
No, I think the public option in competing
I
against the
got you.
private market
Yeah.
would win.
No, I
Because-
think 100%. Yeah, I agree with that. Sorry, I thought you were just thinking
Yes.
that the public option would spur the private option to meet the
No.
necessity.
I
You know
think that
that.
private option would
Would.
break their model.
I
in a lot of
agree.
ways.
I agree 100%, and I'm all for that. I would love nothing more than to see their model broken. But moving on, climate change. Unless there was something else on healthcare that you wanted to cover.
Healthcare has a lot of steps.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing I would add to that. That's a starting point, not a finish. We
Right.
need to move.
In addition to a public option, I'm sure you would, propose at least more basic, at least urgent care clinics
Correct.
or ER
And
rooms, even maybe.
There's a couple things that are out there right now. We're seeing for the boomers out there,
Sure.
we are seeing an increased demand for elder services,
Yeah.
which is out there. For the younger population, we are seeing an increased demand for child healthcare services.
Oh yeah.
And because funding is inherently finite, we have to target these things at least in the short term. But I think we can get them if we target to emergency service, to proactive care services would be
Yeah.
the best way to describe this. I think we need to make it cheaper for people to take care of themselves before it gets to be a critical trip to the emergency room.
For sure.
Would you consider part of healthcare just access to ways to live healthily, as in ways to exercise, but more so access to quality food? Obviously,
Yes.
I live here in Pine City. Our options are Walmart, or you can drive to Cambridge, which is a half hour plus away, where you have a Cub Foods and a few more options, but then again, you're driving further, you're spending more money, and there's just fewer options. And the options that are available at like our local Walmart compared to Cambridge Walmart are even different, and we have fewer options here in Pine City as far as quality, higher dollar products because people can't afford those in this town. Is that something you'd agree would fall under
I would
healthcare?
absolutely agree. That's part of what I mean by being proactive. It's not only food is part of that. I will put in a relatively shameless plug for Chris's Foods out of Sandstone, who delivers to Pine City, and that's how I get my groceries.
Sure.
And I will also mention that one of my personal friends owns the Sprouts grocery store chains
yes,
up
absolutely.
up in this area, and so it's a very small health food chain, obviously a little bit more spendy, but they've done really well because we are missing that option. But having some of that gap between people who would like fresher produce and healthier meals but can't quite afford it, if there was a way to bring that to rural communities where it is a little bit more affordable and we have those options so people could afford to eat in ways that would make them live longer and healthier lives. And do you have any suggestions on that?
There's a couple things that are out there. I'll point people to the Pine Community Action Plan for anybody who doesn't know what that was. That was a citizen group that was put together about 2 years ago now. And they've been working on the idea of bringing more competition into that space within. And they have some things that are underway, and your support to the people who are acting on that would still be a good thing to do if you live in the area. This is
Absolutely.
something, and providing more support to organizations like that can be a way to diminish the upfront cost of some of these health programs. That's always the scare tactic that gets used to make people afraid of cost. But if you're proactive about it, you encourage diet, you encourage exercise, you at least make it a little easier for people. You will reduce healthcare costs overall.
Absolutely. I mean, there's few things that show long-term health results like just diet and exercise accessibility.
Yes.
And I've seen I was watching a documentary recently, and I can't remember what it was, but they had specifically showed two demographics of people on either side of a highway. So everything was pretty much the same in environmental status, except for one community on one side of the highway was a little bit more poverty stricken, and the other one was a bit more affluent.
Yes, understand.
And so that community within, reasonable walking distance had a lot more options for healthier food options, workout options, so and so. And the life expectancy difference was over a decade. And it's just insane. And they've taken out most of the other environmental factors as far as air quality and water quality, because they're all getting the same stuff from the environment that way. So it was just access to that sort of stuff, and then I'm sure access to obviously healthcare, because poorer people have worse access just in general. But
emergencies are the least efficient way to fund.
Yes, they are.
Right, and that's what America is relying more and more on.
Yeah, just
Spilo
get sick enough to go to the emergency room, and that's your healthcare plan for you. But that also brings us with environment and health to climate change, and climate change is something that obviously also affects our personal health, and it's something that we're seeing and is affecting rural communities more and more. Because last year we had a record drought, and then this year it's so wet you can't even get crops in the ground, and it's the unpredictability of that.
Absolutely.
And then just the insane heat every year and whatnot has made it a lot more difficult for people who work outside to do so healthily and safely and whatnot. So climate change is one thing that you and I have talked about in the past. And what is your kind of plans as state level representative to do in that?
Climate change is obviously one of the few possibly existential problems we have here.
Right.
It is. We are. If you look at the IGCC map, Pine County specifically, and then northwest Wisconsin, same idea across, is kind of in a red bullseye as far as crop productivity loss and things like that in their very localized forecasting.
Sure.
So it is truly a local issue. What can we do? In this, we've talked in the environment a long time about think globally and act locally.
Right.
And we need to have ways to do that. We've got good money, which is out there from the Inflation Reduction Act, which needs to be spent.
Yes.
still.
Right.
I encourage a thing called an energy district. This is maybe a little arcane, but do people know what a soil and water conservation district is?
Oh yeah.
If you've got questions about about water conservation projects, like my church planted a pollinator garden, and we asked what seed mix we should apply, and they're a local resource to answer questions and to direct you to funding that you could get locally to try to bring that down to actionable projects which happen. Energy districts are the same idea, except they would be applying this for energy transition projects that address climate change. Whether that's putting solar panels on your house, you can do that. You can figure it all out yourself. You can.
I've looked into it, and it is daunting when you start trying to figure out, because I was like, yeah, you know what, if I could get it and I could finance it to where it would be roughly the same as my power bill, I would do it in a heartbeat. But you start looking into it, and then it seems like it's just a bunch of companies trying to sell you on something, and then you're wondering, is this going to be the best deal? Because obviously there's a whole bunch of middlemen in this process, and it seems very it's very daunting. And there's a lot of obstacles where every time I've pretty much just given up on it.
Yes. A lot of people are the same way.
And they always say that there's funding from the state and tax breaks and that sort of thing, but then I never know what they are.
Yeah.
You never know how to find them because once again, you start searching that and it seems like a bunch of people trying to get their piece of the pie out of those programs. So yeah, a transparent program like that would just direct people through those processes would be excellent.
Right. And the same applies to a little bit larger scale if we're talking a farmer putting in wind turbines, particularly western Minnesota.
Yeah.
You know, I'm running to be a state representative after all. There are other issues in general and it applies, it's done in Iowa, by the way. So this is not a far-fetched kind of thing. It's not done terribly
We have a
far away.
model to work off of.
Yes. And the legislation for it is pretty much existing. It's Soil and Water Conservation District. You can copy it and make your substitutions.
Yeah,
And it's pretty easy to put together. So it's something we could do. Weatherization is something that they also do for efficiency of houses. A lot of people with lack of appropriate insulation, and there's plenty of programs to do that if we can get people
connected to the programs, which you know, and again, rural America tends to have older housing, and a lot of cheaper housing like mobile homes, pre-manufactured homes, trailer houses, which were notoriously poorly insulated to begin with, and then you add a few decades of use and old windows and that sort of thing. So I do think that is an excellent idea.
Is it potentially? I know like a lot of water utilities are publicly owned.
Yes.
Do you foresee any challenges working with electric companies, or is this mainly act separately? Because I know, especially with putting in solar panels, you have to work with your power company to ensure that they have the right equipment to allow the back and forth flow.
Right. And that's absolutely correct. This is not an energy district would not in any way be a replacement for, say, East Central Electric,
Right.
which does a lot of that work in this area. The actual installation is still left to the people who do it.
Sure.
It's just trying to have a competitive marketplace where it's transparent what the things are going to cost, be pointed to the funding you can have, regardless of which company you're going with or utility you're going with, to point you to what is available. That's what we're talking about here. It's not competitive with those. And in fact, the Iowa results, it was kind of surprising that they have seen a tremendous synergy with the rural electric cooperatives because a lot of them have the same goals. They just aren't able to reach the people that they need.
Gotcha. So it's more of creating a store for electric, basically for everybody to show up and communicate there effectively. Okay. That's a great idea.
And I think this is, again, something we can get agreement on. All the ideas I try to think about whether we're going to have to fight about this or whether everybody can look at it.
And the fact that you bring that up kind of brings me to my next topic on climate change because to get agreement on it, you have to have people who admit it's a thing that exists, and science is real. And that's sadly more challenging than it tends to be. And have you run into that talking about this topic? And have you had any success overcoming that? Have you found avenues to help work through that?
The point's well taken. There are always a few people who are convinced that this is all a hoax to deceive them and to get them out of money, essentially, to force them to buy an electric car, for example, or force them to cut back on eating meat, or the kinds of things we hear talked about. It's hard when we try to frame climate change adaptation in terms of sacrifice. And it's not necessary. This is something that we do need to be talking about, how we can invest in better technology that does things. The storage for the electric grids, the iron air batteries developed within Minnesota are one of the most actually promising technologies. You can't speak. There's lots of ideas out there. So, and
the iron air seems really cool. Obviously the practicality of it. I don't know if you have any new information on it.
I have a degree in physics, so I understand the technology. Scaling up is an entirely different thing. And it's one of the reasons, I think in the R&D space, we need to be a little more friendly about research and development everywhere and not be prescriptive about the way we do things, like we talked about with the local government ideas. The best things are where we each try what we can do, and we prove out which ones work. We learn from the people who actually make it work, and then we adopt those things more broadly. Some things are going to fail. It's the nature of trying to hurry a little bit, and climate change is one of those things where, unfortunately, we do need to hurry at this point. So we do need to encourage that. we need to talk about it in terms of helping people to do the right thing, not in terms of taking away your gas-powered car
Right.
or taking away your this mostly works to convince the 70% or so of people in the middle that they don't have to fight it. And once people stop fighting it, most people in their heart of hearts understand that climate change is real. And that, I mean, you can't look at how long you can ski and snowmobile in Minnesota now compared to what you could when I was a child.
Right. Yeah.
And not...
Well,
and
even for
real.
our recollection is vastly different from
it's
childhood
insanely
to now,
different in the past
even
15
if you're a teenager,
years. And yeah, I think that's a good point to bring up. Is it doesn't have to be sacrifice, and it can actually be a big opportunity, especially going back to career opportunities in rural areas. If you were able to implement some of these policies, then you have more people installing solar and other doing winterizing homes or insulating homes, replacing windows. That's all stuff that you need local people driving out to these to install these things. That's the type of jobs that are prime for rural blue-collar workers, that, these kinds of programs can give them a paycheck that can put food on their table, whether they want to believe climate change is real or not, and then that's bringing money to our communities. So I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, that's the best way. I think we can talk to people who question it, whether through lack of knowledge or whether through just a bias based on somebody attacking something they care about.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think so. Coming into this, obviously, you're running for a state seat, and politicians from city council to the president have a lot of big ideas, and they make a lot of big promises. Often the plan of action and the path to success is limited. How they plan on affecting these goals, moving that needle. It's easy to say, this is what I want to do. This is how, this is what we need to do, and then actually getting into office and doing it. So if we vote for you, if we get you into office, how do you actually plan on putting beyond advocacy? Because we can all say, we can run the rah-rah, but what would you do in action to put forth to make these things hopefully happen? And obviously, you can't do anything as one man, but
yes, there are limits. There's clear limits. I can't absolutely promise that any single thing that I will do will happen, and almost certainly wouldn't happen exactly as I propose it. And it shouldn't. We should take people's ideas, we should share, and compromise is what gets us to taking everybody's ideas into play.
Yes.
Now, with that said, I try to focus on things where I think there would be a route to compromise, where I don't think the idea of an energy district, which is done in a fairly red state like Iowa, is necessarily something that we would get tremendous pushback from Republicans. I think there is one thing that is an interesting point that I think we should probably talk about. It something people maybe don't think about. We've seen an increasing split between rural and urban politics.
Yes.
The number of Democratic DFL in Minnesota legislatures is very, very small. The number of urban Republican legislatures is very small. Should I be able to talk enough people into voting for me as a representative of rural communities, I would receive disproportionate attention.
That's a good point. Do you bring that up to potential voters?
I do.
Okay.
And it's one thing that's been a problem. We need diversity in a lot of things. And sometimes we let diversity get hijacked by only racial or only gender. It certainly is that.
Yeah.
Okay. But it is also diversity of background, diversity of employment history, diversity of economic status. All of those things influence the way that we think about the world, and the more perspectives we bring, the better things are going to be. And if we have some rural Democratic voters in the legislature, we can start to put a voice for things that are not exactly the same, and that will help us to have a more civil discussion in general. And I think that disproportionate idea of having someone talk about what we need to invest in rural communities instead of what we need to cut out of taxes,
Right.
which doesn't invest in anybody,
Right.
is something that where we can really make headway.
All
It's
right.
it is something that, and I think that's one of the best hopes in terms of really implementing these agendas. I have no intention of talking about extreme issues for people. Where we can get agreement on these are the areas that we need to be focused, because that's what we can accomplish.
All right, but now, just to kind of press you a little bit more on this, that's still advocacy, more or less. And what you have, if you get elected, you have some levers as a legislator to try to put legislation through. What would your steps be to doing that? What would you be?
In a close vote, okay? One of the things, for example, we are right now in a very closely divided legislature. That means moderates of any form have a disproportionate say, okay?
Yeah.
I'm a little hesitant sometimes to bring this up in an audience, but we remember the things that Joe Manchin put in, despite being a very
dino.
centrist.
Yeah.
That he did in the end get the Inflation Reduction Act passed,
Yep.
and this is the kind of this influence is something that I hope we can take advantage of. Now, in a legislature, you're not a dictator. You're not you can write bills
Yep.
and put them forward. Okay, I have talked about the specific ideas that I would like to carry as bills. That means I have to persuade people from other districts, so it is advocacy to some degree, not necessarily among people
Right.
in general, but among other legislatures and other districts, convincing them that these ideas are best for the people they represent too. And that is, I think, I don't want to make a promise that I can't
absolutely
deliver,
not.
which is, I can't say I will go in and I will write a bill on energy districts and it will get 99% of the
Right.
vote in the in the state legislature, because it won't happen.
And that's what we like to hear, and why I brought this topic up is just because we all get sunshine and roses blowing up our ass every election,
Yes.
and you don't end up getting. A lot of times you start hearing this stuff, and it was like on a grand scale. Donald Trump's like, I'm gonna bring the coal jobs back, and like in my head, I'm like, you can't. You physically can't
Yes.
do that. There's no policy platform you could ever do to make that happen, because coal is dead for purely economic reasons.
Yes.
But
and the jobs are dead for automated
automation reasons. So like it's a dead and gone job. It's gone the way, or it's going the way of the horse and buggy. But you hear that, but it sounds good to those people. And I think a lot of times after we get told so many things, it's like, yeah, we've on climate change, for example, we've been sold a lot of flowery, this is what I'm going to do stuff, and then you get
The Willow Project.
yeah, exactly. And so this, I think it's important when people come in to when politicians come in to not only say like, this is what I believe in and this is how it should be, but these are the actionable steps I intend to take. Because you can promise us to take those steps, and you can keep that promise whether those things pass or not, right?
Yes.
You can promise us that you will go in and you will write this bill. You can promise us that you will go after these particular people or these particular districts to try to get them on board to pass that legislation. And I think that that's important, because if you can't articulate those actionable steps, then everything you stand for means nothing, right? So I appreciate you walking us through that.
Yeah. And I'll point out one more thing here. Even assuming that I convince people to do that, a lot of these things put a lot of trust in local people. Okay, that means you need to talk to your city councilors. You need to talk to your county commissioners. You need to make your voices known to those people, so that we do make successful decisions afterwards. Because everything that I am trying to base these ideas on is based on trust in the goodness of what people are going to do to try to help themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good bet. I don't think we're, that I think that's a winning bet, but it does rely on people.
Trust but verify, right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
So yeah, on your website you have two major topics: is civility for all, and then which we've discussed already to a good amount, and then you have addressing economic inequality.
yes.
Specifically the progress of digitalization and automation.
It's a personal area.
Yeah, as a computer software engineer?
Yes, I did. I did a degree in physics, and then worked for a startup computer company for a long time that grew and sold out, and all of the usual path for that kind of stuff. So I worked a lot on central automation. And you were talking earlier about automation being the death of coal jobs. Okay, it's hard for me to say sometimes, but automation is going to be the death of an awful lot of jobs. We are in an environment that changes very quickly and will change increasingly. My father was a guidance counselor in high school, and he used to say that the average person would work in 5 entirely different career fields in their life. The numbers that I've seen more recently are more than double that.
Okay.
For a typical person, especially when we're talking about gig economy kind of jobs, where you have to reinvent yourself a lot. That means education is all the more important.
Yes.
Right.
And flexibility of education is really important. A lot less of the standardized testing, and a lot more about relationship and learning how to learn. This is a key thing, and we are going to have to think about this in terms of all the bills that we write and all the bills we support, because it means we have to handle transition for the people. We don't want disaffected coal miners to become disaffected shop workers. And this is we need people to have a pathway. We need to encourage the education and the resources to get where we want to go. That means some of these targeted educational programs, like the North Star Promise that's going on out there, are something that we need to do. Thank you to the people in Pine County who've done the Promise at Pine Tech for all local students, getting time there. That is a great encouragement. Things like the nursing program growing very fast there. There are things we can do. This is not an area where I have huge things that I, as a single legislator, can do.
Yeah, no,
it's
certainly
something that has to be thought of in terms of a lot of other bills, and it influences a lot of the other ideas that I have behind. I hope that helps explain why that is a discussion for me. And I think that addressing of income inequality is part of that. A lot less anger when we have opportunity, not necessarily success for all, again, no promises, but opportunity for everybody to reinvent themselves and to change as needed.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talk about all the time how, 1970, whatever, 1971, 73, the, invention of the computer working for commercial businesses increases productivity tenfold and wages stagnate. To now, basically, get a couple percent every year sort of thing when productivity is hundreds of percentages higher. And then I guess my overall question about automation and just, digitalization, is there, in your mind, a replacement factor that you're worried about, or are you pro-automation done in ethical manner, or like, how does that mean to you?
I think being anti-automation is like, the story of Canute, the Viking king.
I don't know.
This is an interesting story. It's from, just from 1,000 years ago or so.
Sure.
He was encouraged by all his people that he was a powerful king and should be helping them in a difficult situation. So he told people to carry his chair out onto the beach, and he sat there while the tide washed up over his chair, saying, "Stop, tide."
No.
Right.
And
so it's trying to change the tides. Is that where the story comes
Stop
from?
the rising tide.
So that's where that idea comes from, is from that story, which is maybe apocryphal, but it's it's one that's been recorded.
Appreciate the Scandinavian Norwegian reference there.
So, but the idea is that you can't be anti something that is the nature of things.
Right.
What we need to do is we need to make sure that people have the resources, that it doesn't hurt people. That means helping people to adapt to change. Sometimes that means slowing change a bit to let people adapt where it's necessary. That's slowing change is inefficient. I like to avoid it when I can.
Right.
But like in the climate change scenario, part of the problem is ecosystems only adapt so fast to change, and if we change too quickly, we can hurt things, and we do that by saving coral from the coral reefs, for example, right now. And so we can look at programs like that to to help in the transient term, but they have to all be sharply sunset because you can't let them become long-term entitlements that prevent people from changing.
Right.
And
Yeah, that
that's
would be unhealthy for the economy and the people
and
involved.
the people, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's my opinion on the idea. It's not something, change is something to be encouraged because it does increase productivity. It does help us overall, but we have to look at human effects and we have to look at how fast people can adjust. Make it adjust faster through education. Good.
Yes.
Sure. Then does it concern you? I mean, obviously, I think it probably does concern you that most automation is done privately,
Yes.
and businesses have no obligation to citizens in a wide scale or even on a employee scale to ensure that they do have any sort of transition.
We hope one of the things, and this is not particularly a state level thing, so I have no idea here on the state level. Talk to your federal representatives about this idea, but we have a situation where corporate boards have become rather unaccountable. It used to be that corporate boards were accountable to stockholders, and that meant, to a degree, to the general public.
Yeah, it's tough now when 1% of the public owns 50% of the stock, so it's kind of like there's only one person that they're really...
Here we need to encourage progressive taxation.
Yeah.
And what this means at the state level, in Minnesota, we're not ridiculous, but it worries me to see increasing pushes to property taxes and to sales taxes, because I think those are the most regressive kinds.
Oh, right.
That hit the lower income people hardest.
The people who spend almost all of their income.
Yes. So at least we exempt food and clothing here, which is better than a lot of places.
Yes.
Definitely better than a lot of
But
places.
it is we need to make sure our taxation, and part of that idea that I talked about with the local government aid and county program aid, where that money comes from is the taxes paid to the state. We've seen a lot of increase in property taxes, a lot of demand for dedicated local sales taxes, which are the regressive kind, that have come in response to that same thing, because those local entities need funding. If we do that, it should at least drive a stabilization in those kind of taxes, where we've dug a pretty deep hole. But hopefully that kind of taxation can gradually reduce the percentage of income, and particularly the percentage of wealth owned by the top 1% of Minnesotans and of U.S. citizens nationally.
Sure.
That's a slow process. It's we have, and I think there are ways to do that. Shop locally. Encourage people to think locally, and this does help small businesses just alone.
Yeah. So. Absolutely. Trying to move along here so we don't run out of time. Running for office is something, we tell people to do all the time because we're hypocrites.
Yeah.
We obviously have not ran for office. I am trying to put a little bit more of my money where my mouth is by getting, a little bit involved with the local DFL stuff. And, Marge is pushing, who's actually on the live right now. She was texting me saying hello. So, Marge, the DFL. But there's a lot of obstacles to running for office of any sort. And, state level, I think that you have a very tangible experience to be able to share with people because, it's easier, obviously, to get into politics running for some sort of state level office or local office, which you've done and you're doing. Can you tell us about some of the struggles you've encountered doing that?
Sure. I want to say two things. I'll talk about struggle. It is not easy. There are barriers to it, and those barriers are unfortunate. Citizens United decision put an awful lot of money into politics. Again, there isn't much at the state level we do about that, but this is an unfortunate thing. It's the part I like least about campaigning is the fundraising part.
Oh, yeah.
The part that I would encourage people, because I need to say a very positive word for what it takes to run. I've been on the other side. I've been very fortunate. I was able to retire early thanks to good luck and a lot of support that I got in my career path.
Sure.
And that time is the biggest deal.
Right.
Now, on the positive side, a lot of people don't run for office because they're afraid of the polarization that we face today. And particularly people who spend a lot of time on social media, you'd sometimes think everyone is entirely insane
Yeah.
if you spend too much time on
Yeah.
social media, because people tend to get attention through extremist views.
Yeah.
Well, and also we've learned that a lot of those people aren't actually people at all, and it's people going out there or bots going out there to look insane, specifically for those reasons and to polarize those things. But yeah,
When you talk to people, like I said, I knocked on about 4,000 doors in the last campaign, and I hope to beat that in this one. And I have relatively few angry conversations. There are a few. It's you have to be willing to take somebody who will not agree with you no matter what you say and won't even talk to you.
I mean, you could be passing out $10 bills and doing nothing else, and you'd probably still end up with a few angry people at that level. 4,000 people, yeah.
Well, you got to up to 20 then.
Maybe, yeah.
I think the campaign finance board might have something to say about that.
Maybe.
But most people agree on a lot of these fundamental issues that we talked about. I get a huge amount of agreement on the local representation idea from people who are avowed Republicans. Okay, it's not something that you have to be afraid of. And as long as you're willing to take the time to talk to people and start out with, my door conversation is not, I'm Eric Olson, I stand for this. It's, I'm Eric Olson, I think listening is the most important part of the job. So tell me what you think is the most important thing we should be doing. That helps me to, get a feel for where a person is. And most important, it helps me to understand what people really care about so I can inform my views about how this is.
Right.
And if you're not afraid to do that, to put in the legwork, as you said, the campaigning can be a good experience. And
For sure.
that applies to a lot of people. You know your neighbors.
Yeah.
And those are the people that you're talking to. And so don't be afraid to get into it. If you need any support for that, the local parties, DFL, will be more than happy to support you. I can't speak for the party on the other side, but I presume that they would have the same.
Yeah.
They would have the same views.
Receptiveness.
Yes.
Well, and so that kind of brought me to that was a follow-up question that you sort of started leading into, but do you have any suggestions for people who do want to get involved to avoid some of the pitfalls that you may have experienced or overcome some of the obstacles that you've
First, get connected to the local DFL. There are things, or the local Republican Party,
whatever local party
you're interested in, because that is how you learn about what the pitfalls are going to be and avoid them. Okay,
Sure.
There are good resources out there, but you're never going to be able to read them through
Right.
and stay awake long enough.
Right. Yeah.
So what you need to do is talk to people. Go out and drink a beer with your local DFL, for example, and you talk to people about what they're seeing. And this is a great way to do it. Community involvement in general is also a good way to get yourself confident. Is, I guess, the best way to say it, because the biggest lack is confidence for people, that you don't feel comfortable in these situations. And that took me a long time.
Yeah.
I am not by nature a tremendously outgoing person, but once you get over it, you can go an awful long ways. And this is my best advice. Start small. Don't start with just, as you've experienced. Come talk to people where you'll find a very happy to receive you crowd.
Oh, they're very happy to receive you. Half the time they still can't answer any more of your questions because they're in the same position you are. But it gets you involved. It gets you in the door for sure, and that's the first step.
And there are people, once you're there, if you express an interest in running for something,
They'll hook you up with the people.
They'll hook you up with the people who really know. That is because there are people out there who are tremendously helpful.
Yes,
sure.
And that's my best advice for you. Get connected locally, start small, build your confidence until you're happy with where you stand, and then make a decision what you care about.
Right.
All right, I'm gonna ambush you a little bit on this one because we talked about this over beers at our last meeting, and the need for younger blood in the political system. Tremendous need, and we can agree on that. But well, here, I'll just ask you instead of putting words in your mouth. Would you support age limits on political positions?
I do not support age limits. Okay, I support processes that encourage younger people to run. Okay, that is, I think hard limits. We learned. I'll give you an example from my childhood.
Yeah.
That my father always had a saying that declaring maximums make minimums.
Sure. Sets a ceiling and a floor.
Yeah.
Yes, at the same time. Because if you set a hard limit, you get a lot of people who play the game to the limit. And what we need to do is we need to getting the money out of politics to lower the barrier for younger people. This is the biggest single thing we can do.
Obviously, so yeah, you're retired, right?
Yes.
And so you have time, which is one of the things. And so the money in politics, it goes beyond just that, because people can't afford to take the time, because time is money. We all know that. You can't afford to take the time. So it goes beyond just getting the money out of politics, which is obviously huge because you need to pay to play now. But I think, you need to pay to live. And if you're spending all of your time knocking on 4,000 plus doors as you're doing or something like that, if you don't have something set up to support you and your family so you have the time to do that, then you aren't going to be able to do that.
You have to at least have a job that lets you have flexible hours, at a minimum is something that's out there in the current setting. Now, that's not necessarily as true for some of the smaller offices, school board, county commissioners, things like that. There is a lower barrier there, and that's a reminder. I would like to, before I lose the idea, North Dakota just passed the age limits that you're describing.
Okay.
So it will be for U.S. offices.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
Like Congress and whatnot?
Yeah. It will be interesting to see the effects of what they do. They will be, and diversity is the most important idea in all of this. This is why we need younger blood. It isn't because younger people are inherently somehow better. It's because younger people provide a different perspective.
Right.
And we are at too few perspectives in our political system. And the most underrepresented group in our political spectrum right now, knock out gender, race, knock out even urban, rural, is younger, older. And this is
millennials are the biggest generational group now and hold like one seat in the Senate.
One seat in the Senate and 31 seats in Congress. So 7% of Congress. We represent 22% of the population. We have 7% of representation in Congress and one seat. So 10% of representation, or 1% of representation in the Senate. Which is, it's criminal, honestly.
It's what we get with a system that is gamed inappropriately.
But then, so then the issue, because you say you don't want to set hard term limits on age, and I don't know if I appreciate some of the points, and I don't know that I agree necessarily. I think I think having a 84-year-old man running for re-election for president presents all kinds of problems, just in the sense of like
finding a chair to sit in,
walking
off a stage. Some of that stuff's overblown, certainly.
Oh, it's definitely overblown.
And perspective on what his life experience is, regardless of how good a person is.
Well, and voting for somebody who very realistically may not survive his term, and that is something, a death of a president is a very traumatic national experience in any situation. It's happened a few times, and we know about a good portion of them, just as the collective conscience. And obviously there's some people who have, some presidents that have passed away a little bit more subtly, but the thing is, so I can't say that I totally agree with you there.
I'm glad to hear diverse opinions.
But
so if
one
not
of the other
sorry. Yeah, if not age limits, do you have a term limit?
I can support a degree of. I think what we need to do. Term limits are one possibility. They have some downsides. I'm always trying to struggle with that as an idea because I'm torn by it. Is it a good idea? There are some very skilled older people that we lose their experience and knowledge if we limit them too shortly.
Sure.
Right.
If we set the limits too long, it's a moot point.
Right.
And it's really the diversity of opinion that we need from younger people, which means It's hard. Okay, I don't have a great opinion for you. This is not an area where I have a solution. I'll tell you just on the spot here. I'll have to tell you what my best ideas around this are.
Sure.
Okay, if we had a more significant candidate funding for local candidates to run at the lower levels. Okay, that means to encourage younger people at city council, county commissioners. This would build a lot more experienced people a lot more quickly.
Yeah.
I think that's something that where we could probably address the issue, and then let that wave that we would hopefully get propagate up. So the ideas that I'm applying would probably be best applied at the levels where we can get a younger person practically involved.
Okay.
It's not great. It's
No.
not the best.
I think that is great. I do honestly think that is great, getting people involved, making it financially possible for people to get involved at that level.
I mean, at minimum, it creates a slight incentive. It's not like you're really doing a huge structural change to make the changes in the big way, but you are at least making it easier.
Yeah, but
to
not
make
even
the
necessarily
change.
an incentive to get people who wouldn't normally do it to do it, but just it removes an obstacle of people who want to do it but can't. And I think that is important. But one of the things where I'm, like I said, I find it difficult to agree on not having either term limits or age limits is people can't move into a space that somebody else hasn't moved out of, and older people tend to hang on to these spaces literally till they die. I mean, Chuck Grassley's like 246 now, and
spaces aren't. This is not safe for some people. I mean, I always felt sorry for Dianne Feinstein, for example, to give a very classic example.
Right.
I think there is one thing that I hadn't mentioned, which we can do that might be a pure political scenario, which is to do a better rotation of commission assignments. Because a lot of the reason that people are staying in the seat is because by seniority, you get the most important position of power. And it's hard to give that up for your constituents once you have it.
Right.
Because you're after all, even let's give people the absolute benefit of the doubt.
Right.
You're there to serve the people that elected you. The more you can have influence, like you talked about earlier, the more I can make say for what I'm going to do, the better, the more I can push my policy items forward. And that's what drives this. If we had those committee assignments rotating a little more and a little more democracy in the way those get done, that I think would be very helpful. I've been particularly dismayed at the federal level with the don't bring any bills forward unless they have the whole of the speaker, for example.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was just looking at this right now. So like the first 5 people is Hal Rogers, is the oldest, more senior senator. 1981 was when he first started. He's the dean of the House. Then you have Steny Hoyer, Chris Smith, Marcy Kaptur.
Yeah, sure.
But then you basically have like Frank Pallone, who is the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce, Richard Neal, ranking member of Ways and Means, Rosa DeLauro, Appropriations, Maxine Walters, Financial Services, and it just
all
goes
these
on.
people have been in office for 30 or 40 years at least.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And some of this also falls on us as people to remember. This, after all, we can vote people out of office.
Yeah.
If they, it's harder at the higher level you get, the harder, because it's harder to get a candidate started.
Yeah.
But we can vote for new blood. We can vote for people who bring new ideas into the space, and that's important. I can't claim I'm young in terms of age limit, but I'm still at least bringing, I hope, new ideas to things that people would be willing to listen to.
Well, and I appreciate you having that conversation, because obviously we had this conversation over beers and pizza with a larger group of people the other day, and it was a somewhat divided conversation because there was some younger people and then obviously some older people, and you're the one running, so obviously you're going to have some opinions about this as well, doing this as a retired guy and all of that. But I think it's one of those things that we need to find some solutions to, because obviously, the average age of the Senate is 65. When normal people are retiring, that's their average age. That's just getting broken for a senator, and it's really difficult because younger people are feeling much more disenfranchised every year, and it makes it a lot harder, I think, for the people who represent us to understand that, because a lot of times we bring things up to them that they don't realize are important to us, or think that it's not as irrelevant of a topic for them to address.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely
how do
agreed
you
to that.
regulate a tube that information flows through? You know, like how can you build standards on social media when that's what the internet is? You know, like.
But yeah, it's true. Does it connect to the Wi-Fi? And thankfully, you in being in the tech industry are hopefully a little bit more in tune with some of that stuff.
Yes.
But
I hope so.
most of our representatives, can barely turn on a computer and have to call their grandparents to figure out why their smartphone hasn't updated yet, and that's a problem essentially in a technologically advancing world.
Takes up a lot of electricity making those phone calls. I'm just putting that out there.
All right. Well, was there anything else that you wanted to touch on while we were here? Do you feel like you covered?
We've hit, I think, some of the major points. I first want to just thank you for
Yeah,
having
of
me on,
course.
and thank the audience for
Yeah.
taking the time to listen. I hope this is useful. I do think listening is the most important part of the job. As I said, I talk to people at the doors, and the same thing applies to you when I'm talking to you online. And my contact information is all fully publicly available.
Yep.
And I strongly encourage anyone who has issues that they would like to raise with me, viewpoints that I may not have.
Yeah.
And there are lots of them. No one knows everything. It's why, the from many one idea, that's the whole campaign motto. Reach out to me. Tell me what you think is important, and tell me why I'm completely wrong with
Yeah.
everything that I believe.
Sure.
And, we'll have a civil discussion, and we'll sort out, and maybe both of us will learn something. So,
Absolutely.
Well, no, we appreciate you taking your time to come on here and give us the opportunity to ask you questions. Obviously, this is personally relevant to me because I'm in the district that you're running for. But I think it's relevant on a broader scale too, as far as getting people involved in politics and talking to the people who are trying to get involved in politics. And we will have anybody on running for at least a somewhat relevant office we can talk about. I think we're pretty open to that, and we appreciate the people who come on and do that. We really
Thank you.
appreciate having you here for this. So it's Eric Olson. Yeah.
running for State House, District 11B.
Yep.
All right. And there's no primary for you. It's
No
just-
primary. I am unopposed, as is the incumbent. Also
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
So it will be Nathan Nelson and I in the general election.
in November.
And honestly, I hope Nathan Nelson does actually take us up on the offer to come on, because I know
Yes.
sometimes it feels a little one-sided. We're a progressive, unapologetically progressive platform,
Yes.
but I hate echo chambers. Absolutely despise
Great.
echo chambers, and
I don't help anybody.
nope. We try to do everything we can to avoid being one. Yeah, it doesn't matter what party they're running for. We like having the views on the show, and we hope to get some more conservative voices as well to just see what their perspective is, and again, tell us why we're wrong about all the things that we believe.
Yeah, we don't have many people that say that we're just like way off base. You get them in your comments. a
Yeah,
lot, but,
occasionally, but usually there's not a whole lot of substance behind those comments.
No,
It's just like,
no, it doesn't go very far.
you're
usually.
YOUR so wrong. Go fuck yourself.
Grammar matters, people. just saying.
But no, as far as everybody watching, everybody on the lives that's been tuning into these, we appreciate. Hope you're enjoying the behind the scenes sneak peek on the podcast stuff. We appreciate you tuning in for that. We appreciate everybody who downloads, listens on their way to work, watches on YouTube in video format if you prefer that. Everybody who has been buying merch at offtowagon.com for my stuff, for the podcast as well, that helps us pay the bills to keep doing this. All the financial gifts that you guys send, we appreciate the hell out of that. And we just appreciate you tuning in and watching and listening. We wouldn't be doing this if nobody paid attention to us. So we love you all, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much.
That's right. Thanks for tuning in.